The check was for $5 million, and it had my name on it, and my uncle tore it into 4 pieces at my grandmother's kitchen table, while the lemon cake she baked 3 days before she died sat between us untouched. I was 33 years old. There was cold coffee in front of me. My aunt was smoothing her napkin like the fabric had offended her. My mother was staring at a spot on the wall 6 inches above my head so she would not have to look at me. And my Uncle Ray was holding the 2 halves of that check up like a man showing a jury the evidence, and then he turned them and he tore them again. 4 pieces. He dropped them on the placemat in front of me one at a time, the way you drop scraps for a dog you do not particularly like. Then he sat down. Then he picked up his fork. I smiled at him. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not say one single word. I reached across the placemat and I picked up every piece of that $5 million check, and I walked to the drawer beside the stove and I took out a sandwich bag, and I put those 4 pieces inside it, and I pressed the seal shut with my thumb. My mother watched me do it. My mother said nothing. 15 minutes later, my phone rang, and what a woman in a bank told me on the other end of that line was the first thing my family got wrong that afternoon. What they did to me over the next 90 days was worse. What my mother did to me on day 47 almost broke me in half. And what I did in a courthouse conference room on the morning of July 8th is the reason I am sitting here talking to you today. If you have ever been the quiet one in your family, the one who kept the calendar, the one who kept the medication list, the one who kept her mouth shut while everyone else took what they wanted, stay with me. Because this story is for you. Drop a comment below and let me know you're here, and if you have not already, hit that subscribe button, because what happens between minute 40 and minute 50 of this video is something I have never told anyone before today. My name is Meredith Milber, and this is the story of the 4 pieces of paper that changed my life. I moved up to Cutter Ridge in March of 2020 when I was 27 years old. I gave up a 1-bedroom apartment in Mercer Falls with a dishwasher and a parking spot, and I never got either one of those things back. My grandmother's house sat at the top of a gravel switchback, 22 miles from town, 35 minutes if the road was dry, longer if it was not. Her name was Alma Kessler. She was 83 years old the year I moved in. She had a walker she hated and a mind like a bank vault. I taped her medication schedule to the refrigerator with blue painter's tape, and every time Dr. Greer adjusted a dose, I wrote the change in by hand. I am a licensed practical nurse. I've been one since 2014 when I was 21 years old and still living over a garage. And I kept working my shifts the whole 6 years I lived with her. Down the ridge at 6 in the morning, back up at 4 in the afternoon. The agency paid me $26.40 an hour to take care of other people's grandmothers. Nobody paid me for mine. Thursdays were hers, 4 o'clock, every single week. No exceptions. And if I said I was tired, she would put her coat on anyway, and she would stand by the door with her purse pressed against her chest until I got my keys. We drove to the Rowan Valley Bank branch on Water Street. She went inside and she did whatever she did in there. And then we walked 2 doors down and she bought 1 lemon cake, and she ate a slice on the drive home with her fingers. And she got crumbs in the seat seam, and she never once apologized for it. In 6 years, my mother came up that hill 4 times. My Uncle Ray came at Christmas and never stayed a full hour. And then in the last 3 weeks of her life, my grandmother started to hurry. On the 11th of March, she told me to fill the tank. She did not say why. Alma Kessler did not answer questions she had not asked herself first. That night I sat on the end of her bed and I said what I had already said twice that winter, which was that she needed to talk to a lawyer. There was a woman in Mercer Falls who did wills for $200, and I offered to drive her and sit in the car. My grandmother looked at me the way she looked at a jar lid that would not turn. I do not need permission to spend my own money, she said, and that was the last time we discussed it. The next afternoon, we drove down. She wore her church coat in the truck in March, and she made me park in the 2nd row so she could see the door. Inside, the branch manager came out from behind the teller line and called her Mrs. Kessler, like they were old friends because they were old. Friends because they were. Her name was Delia Puitt. She took my grandmother back into the glass office at the end of the lobby, and my grandmother stopped in the doorway. She turned around. She pointed at the row of chairs by the window. So I sat. I sat there for 40 minutes with a magazine about boats and I did not go in. Because when you have a license with your name on it, you learn early where the line is and you stay on your side of it. When she came out, she had a white envelope in her hand and she did not open it. She got into the truck and she looked out the windshield at the bakery 2 doors down and she said something to me that I would not understand for another 6 weeks. Nobody was ever going to pay you for this, she said, so I did. I answered her with something about the lemon cake being too dry lately. That was it. That was the last important conversation we ever had and I spent it on a cake. When we got home, she set the envelope down beside the sugar tin on the counter and she never mentioned it again. And I never opened another person's mail in my life. She died at 10:06 in the morning on the 4th of April in her own bed with the window cracked because she liked the sound of the pines. I was there. I had been up with her since 3. I did the last things myself, the way I have done them for strangers 100 times. And then I sat on the floor with my back against her dresser until the light came all the way up. Then I called my mother. Within 48 hours, that house was full of people who had not driven up that road in years. And on the second morning, I came in from the truck and I saw something that I did not understand until much later. Something that meant nothing to me in the moment and everything to me by the end of the summer. Something my uncle was carrying out the front door under a tarp. I am going to tell you what was in that drawer, but not yet. Because to understand what my Uncle Ray had done, you have to understand what happened at the lunch after the funeral. And to understand what happened at that lunch, you have to understand where they sat me. They sat me in the corner chair with my back to the stove. That is where you put the person who will be getting up to fetch things. There was a stack of mail on the counter that had been building for a week. Condolence cards. A propane bill. And underneath all of it, the white envelope that had been sitting by the sugar tin since March. Ray brought the whole stack to the table and he went through it while people ate. And then he opened one envelope with a butter knife, and he read what was inside. And then he read it again. And his face did a thing I had never seen it do in 33 years of knowing him. Then he read it out loud. Cashier's check. Rowland Valley Bank, $5 million, dated March 12th. Payable to Meredith Milber. Somebody's fork hit a plate. My mother put both hands flat on the tablecloth. Colleen smoothed her napkin across her lap and lined the edge up with the table. You will never see a cent, honey, she said in the voice she uses in the church parking lot. And Ray held that check up with both hands, and he tore it lengthwise right through my grandmother's signature. And the paper made almost no sound. He turned the halves, and he tore them again. 4 pieces on the placemat in front of me. Money follows the name Meredith, he said. You just did the work. I gathered the 4 pieces, I put them in a sandwich bag. I carried the coffee pot around the table and I filled everybody's cup because that is what I am for. And I sat back down in the corner chair and I waited for them to leave. They were gone by 5:20. Ray went last. He stopped on the top step and he told me I could stay in the house through the end of the month. And he meant it as generosity. I stood at the window and I watched 3 sets of taillights go down the switchback in a line. Then the ridge was quiet in the way it only gets in April. That thin wind in the pines. And I went out and I sat on the porch with the sandwich bag on my knee. I had $9,200 in a savings account. I had a truck with 191,000 miles on it. I had a nursing license. A duffel bag of scrubs. And 4 pieces of a piece of paper that I could not have explained to a stranger why I was keeping. I was not crying. I was making a list. Because a list is a thing you can hold. My phone buzzed face down on the porch rail and I almost let it go. The screen said Rowan Valley Bank, Mercer Falls. It was 5:06 on a Friday. Banks do not call you at 5:06 on a Friday. Miss Milber, the voice said. This is Delia Poot. I am calling about the item your grandmother had drawn on March 12th. Is this a bad time? I told her it was not a bad time. I told her the check no longer existed. I described what was in the sandwich bag. And I heard her put her pen down on the other end of the line. All right, she said. Then let me explain what you actually have, because I do not think anybody in that room understood it. A personal check, she said, is a promise from a person and it dies with the person. A cashier's check is not that. A cashier's check is the bank's own obligation drawn on the bank's own funds. The money leaves the customer's account the day it is issued. Your grandmother's money went out of her account on March 12th. It has not been hers since, it has been ours. And we owe it to the person named on the front. I asked her what happens when the front gets torn into 4 pieces. There is a form for that, she said. A declaration of loss, sworn and signed under penalty of perjury. And it starts a clock. Under the law, the bank pays the claim on the 90th day after the date written on the check. And the date written on that check was March 12th. I sat on the top step and I worked it out on my fingers like a child. June 10th. He tore up nothing, I said. He tore up a piece of cardstock, she said. Come see me Thursday and bring a photo ID. I should have felt something enormous right then. Mostly, I felt cold in my hands. Then I asked her the question that ruined my sleep for the next 2 months. Can anybody stop this? Delia Pete was quiet for 2 full seconds. And I have thought about those 2 seconds more than I have thought about the $5 million. The check, no, she said. But somebody can try to unwind the gift itself. That is a different fight, and it is not with us. I did not know it yet, but that different fight had already started. It had started the moment my uncle carried a desk drawer out of that house under a tarp on the 2nd morning. And what was in that drawer was going to cost me my job, my license, my mother, and very nearly the money my grandmother left me, because on Monday morning I was going to open my mailbox at the bottom of the hill. And what was waiting for me inside it was a certified letter from a lawyer in Columbus, Ohio that would use one word to describe me. And that one word was going to change everything. If you are still with me, hit that like button right now. Because we are just getting started. And the next part is where it stops being a story about money and starts being a story about who your family really is when the light goes out. Thursday at 4 in the afternoon, I drove 22 miles down the ridge with nobody in the passenger seat. I want to tell you, it felt like victory. It felt like the worst hour of the week. And it still does. Because for 6 years, 4 o'clock on Thursday belonged to a woman in a church coat who made me park in the 2nd row. Delia had the paperwork ready on the corner of her desk. I read every line. I signed the declaration of loss. I signed under a sentence that said I understood I was swearing to this under penalty of perjury. My hand was steady, which surprised me. She made 2 copies and she put one in a manila envelope and she wrote the date on the flap in blue pen. June 10th, she said. I will call you when it is cut. Do not let anybody talk you into signing anything before then. I asked her if that happened often. She said it happened almost every time. On the way home, I called my mother 3 times. It rang, and then on the 3rd try, it went straight to the recording, which meant she had turned the phone off with her thumb while it was in her hand. I stopped at the mailbox at the bottom of the driveway because the county puts them all down at the road on that stretch. There was a propane flyer, a church bulletin, and a certified letter with a green card stapled to the front. The return address said Landry and Voss, attorneys at Law, Columbus, Ohio. I have never lived in a house where a Columbus lawyer had a reason to write to me. I sat in the cab with the dome light on and the engine running, and I opened it right there at the bottom of the hill. It was 4 pages long and it was very polite. Raymond O. Kessler, in his capacity as executor of the estate of Alma J. Kessler, was asking a court to set aside a transfer made on March 12th on the grounds of undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. That is the language. What it means in a kitchen is simpler. It means she was not in her right mind, and the woman who fed her was working her. On page 2, they described me. They called me the paid caregiver who relocated into the decedent's residence. I read that line under the dome light 4 or 5 times, paid, 6 years. And the only money that ever changed hands between me and my grandmother went the other direction when I bought the ramp lumber in 2021 and never mentioned it. But the word was in there now. Typed in a document with a case number waiting to be stamped on it. Attached at the back were exhibits. Exhibit C was a photocopy of the medication schedule I had taped to her refrigerator. My handwriting, 6 years of pen changes. And underneath it, a line explaining that this demonstrated the extent of the respondent's control over the decedent's daily affairs. That was the moment my hands started shaking. And it was not about the money. I have kept a chart on a refrigerator for every patient I have ever loved. They had taken the most careful thing about me and turned it into the proof. The dome light was draining the battery. I folded the letter along its own creases. I put it back in the envelope. I drove up the hill. I made a piece of toast I did not eat. And then I opened the drawer where my grandmother kept the phone book. Because I needed a lawyer before Monday. And I did not know a single one. Vernon Ashbrook kept an office on the second floor above the hardware store on Water Street, up a staircase that announced every person who used it. He was 64 years old and semi-retired, which he told me twice in the first 10 minutes. And he had a coffee maker older than I am. He read the letter with his glasses pushed up on his forehead. 2 separate animals, he said, and he laid a pen across his desk to make a line. On this side, the check. That is finished. The bank will issue it on June 10th because the law says so, and there is nothing your uncle can do about it. Then he tapped the other side of the pen. On this side, the gift. He cannot take the money from the bank. He can try to take it from you after you have it. He explained the part that sat on my chest for the next 3 months. A caregiver who benefits from a transfer starts out behind. Not guilty, he said, but behind. Because the law knows how many old women get emptied out by the person who brings them their pills. The whole case, he said, would come down to one question that a judge would answer yes or no. Was Alma Kessler of sound mind and acting freely on the morning of March 12th? Everything else was noise. His retainer was $7,500. I had $9,200. I wrote the check at his desk and my handwriting looked like somebody else's. At the door, he said the thing I should have written on my hand. They are not going to fight the check, Meredith. They're going to fight you. I did not know how right he was, because somebody knocked on my door at 8:40 the next morning, and she had a lanyard and a canvas folder. And she was standing on my porch with a list of questions that had been written by someone in my own family. She was younger than me, and she was decent about it, and I want to be fair to her, because she did not write the report. She only had to answer it. Adult Protective Services. We sat at my grandmother's table and she went down a list. Did I hold a debit card in Alma Kessler's name? No. Did I have power of attorney? No. My mother did. Since 2016. Who drove Mrs. Kessler to her financial institution? I did, every Thursday for 6 years. Did I go into the office with her on March 12th? No. Why not? Because I have a license number and I know what it is worth. She wrote that down and I watched her write it and I thought that will look defensive on paper. It did. I answered every single question correctly. I had done everything right for 6 years. And the only thing I had ever wanted was for someone to notice. And now someone had come all the way up the ridge with a folder to notice in the worst possible way. At the end, she closed the folder and she said she would be recommending no finding, but that the file had to stay open through the review because a report had been made, and reports do not unmake. I asked her who made it. She looked at me with real regret. It is recorded as a family member, she said. I am not permitted to say more. She drove down the switchback at 11:40. At 2 that afternoon, Denise Codd called me from the Ridgeline office. And Denise has never in 9 years called me from her own desk phone. A complaint had been filed with the State Board of Nursing. Same allegations, different letterhead. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult by a licensed practical nurse. Denise read me the sentence. And then she stopped reading. Meredith, she said. I have to pull you off the schedule. Not fired. Pending. Pending is worse. Because pending has no date on the end of it, the agency's insurer would not cover a nurse with an open exploitation complaint. And Denise's hands were tied by a policy she had helped write in 2019. I did the math while she was still talking. $26.40 an hour. 36 hours a week. Gone by Monday. $5 million in a bank vault, 22 miles away. And I could not buy groceries with it. I believe you, Denise said, and her voice cracked on the second word. I still have to do this. Then she told me something I already knew and had hoped nobody would go looking for. In August of 2023, my grandmother had strep and could not stand up. and I signed for her antibiotics at the pharmacy counter using her name and my initials. Because the pharmacist knew us both, it took 9 seconds. It is a documentation violation, a real one, small and stupid. And mine. And it had been sitting in a computer for nearly 3 years. If they go looking, Denise said, they will find it. I hung up the phone, and I sat at my grandmother's kitchen table, and I stared at the refrigerator where the medication schedule used to be, and I thought about who in my family had known about that pharmacy pickup in August of 2023. There was only one person, my mother. If you are the one in your family who keeps the medication list, who keeps the calendar, who shows up when nobody else does, I need you to hear me. Comment down below and tell me you understand. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it now, because what my mother said to me through a storm door on the 9th of April is the reason I could not sleep for 3 weeks. And it gets worse before it turns. I drove 9 miles out to my mother's house without calling first. My mother's house is a ranch on the edge of Ledbetter, with a carport and a hydrangea she has been killing since 2011. She opened the door about 8 inches. She did not invite me in. She did not close it either. And we stood like that with the storm door between us and her television going in the other room. She looked terrible. My mother is 58 years old, and she is a good-looking woman when she sleeps, and she had not been sleeping. I did not lead up to it. I asked her whether she had signed a statement saying that her mother did not know where she was on the morning of March 12th. She did not say no. That is the part I keep. She did not say no. She did not say no. She did not say yes. She looked past my shoulder at the carport and her mouth went thin and flat, the way it does when she is holding something with both hands. I asked her why. I asked her if she knew what it does to a case when the daughter says the mother was gone. I told her about the board complaint and my shifts and the woman with the lanyard. And I heard my own voice stay level the entire time. Which is a thing I am proud of and also a thing that has cost me. She waited until I ran out. Then she said the only sentence she gave me that spring. And she said it to the carport, not to me. You do not know what he has. I asked what that meant. She shut the door. And then through the wood I heard her turn the deadbolt. I drove back up the ridge in the dark. And I did not understand what she meant. I would not understand what if she meant. I would not understand for another 63 days. But I know now that she was trying to warn me, in the only way she was allowed to. There was a locksmith's van parked in my grandmother's driveway, with its engine still ticking. Ray was standing on the porch under the timer light with his hands in his jacket pockets. He was not enjoying it. I will say that for him. The house and the 180 acres were estate property. He was the executor. The executor secures the property. Every word of that is true, and a lawyer would say it in the same order. He gave me 2 hours. The locksmith kept his head down and worked and did not look at either of us. And I felt sorrier for him than for myself. I carried out 2 boxes, a chair my grandmother nursed my mother in, her walker, my scrubs, the blue painter's tape, and the coffee can of buttons she would not throw away. I left the dishes. I left the good glasses. I was on my 3rd trip, coming through the kitchen with a box on my hip, when I stopped in the doorway. Because the refrigerator door was bare, the medication schedule was gone. Somebody had taken it down, and it was in an exhibit binder in Columbus, and standing there with a box against my hip, I finally heard what my grandmother had said in the truck on March 12th in the parking lot, looking at the bakery 2 doors down. Nobody was ever going to pay you for this. So I did. I put the box in the truck bed. Ray watched me from the porch until I was done. Then he got in his pickup and went down the switchback and his taillight swung out at the second turn the way everybody's do. I did not follow him. Here is the thing, nobody in my family remembered including me for about 4 hours. In the fall of 2021, my grandmother had a surveyor come up and cut 1 1/10 acres off the northwest corner of the property and deed it to me outright. It was recorded at the courthouse. It was mine, free and clear. And no executor on earth could touch it. It is also without argument the worst acre on Cutter Ridge. It is a rock shelf on a north slope where nothing grows but scrub locust. It has no road frontage. And the only thing on it is a dug well from the 1940s with a concrete cap. The county assessor values it at $4,200. At the time, I thought she did it because she felt bad that I had given up my apartment. I thanked her. And I never thought about it again. I did not know it yet. But my grandmother had known. 2.5 years before she died. She had known exactly what her children were going to do to me. Behind the equipment shed there was a 1994 travel trailer that my grandfather bought used, and my grandmother refused to sell. 24 feet. 2 flat tires. A wasp nest in the awning arm. I called a man in Ledbetter with a wrecker, and I paid him $400 to drag it up the hill. He set it on my rock shelf on cinder blocks. And I put the 2 flat tires in the truck and had them fixed in town. And I ran an extension cord to nothing, because there was nothing to run it to. From my new front step, I could see my grandmother's porch 200 feet, maybe a little less straight across the swale. The timer light came on at 7, and I sat on a milk crate and watched it and ate a sandwich. Everybody in Harlow County uses that road. By Sunday, every single person who went up or down that ridge saw a 24-foot trailer parked in the rocks 200 feet from a loft house, with a nurse's truck beside it. I meant them to? On Tuesday morning, I turned the tap and nothing came out. The well on my acre is old, but the line that fed the trailer ran back across the state ground to the pressure tank in the equipment shed, and the equipment shed was raised and locked. He did not do it himself. A plumber came up on a Monday, disconnected a fitting, capped it, and left a card wedged in my door that said he was sorry and that he had been hired by the estate. That is how it went for the next 3 weeks. I hauled water in 5-gallon jugs from the gas station in Ledbetter. 4 jugs at a time. 9 miles each way. And I got very good at washing my hair in a dish tub. Somebody moved a hay wagon across the top of my 2 tracks, so I had to back down the hill. A branch came down across my truck that had not come down in any wind I felt. None of it was worth calling anybody about. And all of it together took something out of me that the lawsuit had not. The porch light across the swale still came on every night at 7 on a timer nobody had thought to unplug. Lighting an empty house for nobody. Tessa drove up on a Thursday with a cooler of ice and a case of water in her back seat, and she would not come inside. And she stood by her car with her arms crossed. "You should know what they are saying," she said. "They are telling people you got Grandma to sign over her money at the end." I asked her who they were telling. Tessa looked at the ground. "Everybody," she said. 2 days later, Vernon called me, and he did not start with hello. Landry had filed his witness list. There were 4 names on it, and the second name was Patrice Milber, my mother. Attached was a sworn affidavit, 2 paragraphs, signed and notarized on the 29th of April. In it, my mother stated that she had spoken to her mother by telephone on the morning of March 12th, that her mother had not known where she was, and that her mother had referred to her late husband as if he were in the next room. Owen Kessler died in 2009. Vernon read it to me over the phone in a flat voice, and then he waited. "A jury forgives a lot," he said finally. "They do not forgive a daughter who says her own mother was gone, unless it is true. It reads true. That is the problem." I was sitting on the milk crate outside the trailer with the phone against my ear, watching that porch light across the swale. I told him what Ray had said at the table with a butter knife in his hand. "Money follows the name Meredith. You just did the work." I said it in Ray's cadence without meaning to. Vernon was quiet, and then he said the sentence that turned the whole spring. "Meredith, your mother is a 58-year-old woman who will not open her door to her own daughter. She is not lying for money. Nobody lies that badly for money." He asked me what my uncle had on her. I said I did not know. He said we had better find out, and then he told me the date, because Vernon always ended calls with a date. 27 days to June 10th. Stay with me. Because what my mother came up my 2-track and told me on the 22nd of May at 11 o'clock at night in the pouring rain is the moment this entire story cracked in half. And you are going to need to hear it twice to believe it. On the 10th of June, Delia Pewid called me at 9 in the morning and she did not bother with hello. Ready, she said. I put on the good shirt I had worn to the funeral, because it was the only thing in the trailer that was not scrubs. She came out from behind the teller line, and she did not call me honey, and she did not call me sweetheart. She said, Ms. Milber. And she handed me a cashier's check for $5 million across the counter. And she made me count the zeros out loud with her, which is procedure, and which I have thought about many times since. Then she said, do not deposit that anywhere but here, and do it now. I did. It sat in an account with my name on it for 38 minutes. At 9:41, Landry filed an emergency motion in Harlow County, and a judge signed an order the same afternoon, freezing the funds in the court's escrow, pending the outcome of the contest. Vernon called it standard. He said it in the voice you use when a thing is standard. And also a knife. So, on the 10th of June, I became a woman with $5 million. And on the way home, I bought 4 jugs of water at the gas station in Ledbetter and paid with a debit card that had $380 behind it. I want you to sit in that with me, because I sat in it for 4 weeks. I owned the money. I could not touch a dollar of it. I could not go back to work. I could not go home. And my mother would not open her door. When I came up the switchback that evening, Ray's pickup was parked at the head of my 2-track with the engine off, and Ray sitting in it. He did not get out. He rolled the window down halfway and rested his arm on the door. And we topped through a gap the width of my hand while the light went down behind the far ridge. He said he had heard about the escrow. He said it the way you mention weather. Then he told me something I did not ask for. In 1987, he was 22 years old and he had an offer from a tool and die shop in Columbus, 40 minutes from a girl he was seeing. And he had his bag in the truck. His father walked out and put one hand flat on the gate and did not raise his voice. The oldest stays. That was the whole speech. Ray stayed. He has been on this ridge for 39 years since. He has had 2 mortgages on the same house, and a back that quit in 2014. And he has never lived anywhere his father did not put him. I fixed that furnace 9 times, he said. I put the ramp gravel down. He looked at me then. And his eyes were wet, and I felt something move in my chest that I did not want to feel. She never gave me one thing, he said. She gave it all to you. I told him she gave him the farm and the house and half of everything left. And Raymond Kessler looked at his hands on the steering wheel, and he said the thing that put the light out in me for good. You changed her sheets for 6 years, and you got paid $5 million for it. That is better money than any woman in this county ever made. Then he started the truck. Before he backed out, he said one more thing, and he said it almost kindly. Which is the part I cannot get around. You think your mother signed that paper for money? He did not phrase it as a question. And then he was gone. I sat on that milk crate for a long time. And I finally started to understand what my mother had said to me through a storm door. You do not know what he has. I did not know it yet, but I was about to. Because 10 hours later, Colleen walked into a dental practice on Route 9 and sat down in the waiting room without an appointment and started reading a magazine. And Tessa, my cousin, my one cousin, the only person in my family who had said my grandmother's first name out loud that whole week, was working the front desk. Tessa sent me a message that night that said she was sorry, and that she could not, and then nothing at all after that. Not a call. Not a wave from a car. Nothing for the rest of the summer. The cooler she brought me was still sitting outside my door with the lid propped open. I kept using it. I want to be honest about what that week did. Because it was not the lawsuit that got me. I have been the person who gets left since I was 11 years old. When my father died and the house filled up with people for a week and then emptied out and stayed empty, I am good at it. I have a whole set of skills for being the one who stays behind and makes the coffee. And the terrible thing is how comfortable it is. I sat on the milk crate in the dark, with the porch light burning across the swale, and I thought, well, this is familiar. Then my phone lit up with an email from Landry and Voss. Sent at 9 at night, which is when lawyers send the ones they want you to read alone. The first offer was $150,000. It came with two other things. And the two other things were the reason I sat with a pen in my hand for 40 minutes. The complaint to the Board of Nursing would be withdrawn within 5 business days. The Adult Protective Services report would be marked resolved with a family statement. In exchange, I would abandon my claim to the gift. Take the 150 and sign a paragraph on the second page acknowledging that my grandmother's capacity on March 12th was, and I am quoting, reasonably disputed. Rain started on the trailer roof about the time I picked up the pen. And if you have never been inside a 24-foot aluminum box in a hard rain, it is not a peaceful sound. It is a sound like being inside a drum somebody else is playing. I had the pen on the paper. Here is what I want you to understand. Because I did not understand it that night, and it took me until July to say out loud, I was not sitting there wanting the money. The money was not real to me. It never had been. I was sitting there wanting my badge back. I wanted Denise to call me and read me a schedule. I wanted somebody to need me on a Tuesday. 6 years of Thursdays, 12 years of never turning down a shift. And it was the same hunger the whole time. And Ray had found it before I did. And he had priced it at $150,000. My grandmother's voice came up out of the rain. Flat. In a bank parking lot in March. Nobody was ever going to pay you for this. So I did. I put the pen down on the table. At 11 o'clock, headlights came up my 2-track and washed across the trailer wall. I want you to breathe with me for a second. Because what my mother told me, sitting on the edge of that bunk in her raincoat with the hood still up, is the thing I have never told anyone. Not Vernon, not the judge, not even Tessa. Comment the word here if you are still with me. Because I need to know somebody heard this. And hit subscribe, because it is about to turn. She sat on the edge of the bunk in her raincoat with the hood still up and would not take it off. And she talked to the floor of a travel trailer for 20 minutes. Between the fall of 2022 and the end of 2023, she used the power of attorney my grandmother signed in 2016 and took $61,400 out of her mother's accounts. It went in 14 months. And it went in pieces, 3,000 and 4,000 at a time. Some of it paid off 2 credit cards. 11,000 of it went to a man named Kurt Sizemore, who told her he was going to be able to pay it back in the spring, and there was no spring. My grandmother found it in early 2024. She did not call a lawyer. She did not call the sheriff. She did not take the power of attorney back, which I still cannot decide was mercy or something harder. She told my mother it was forgiven, and it was finished. And she was never to speak about it again. She never told me. She never told anybody. Then on the 4th of April, a man carried a desk drawer out to a pickup truck under a tarp, and inside that drawer were 14 months of bank statements with the withdrawals circled. Because my grandmother circled things. Ray never threatened her. My mother made a point of that twice in that flat voice people use when they are defending the person who owns them. He just came by and sat in her kitchen. And said he supposed Landry would need to see everything in the drawer, unless there was some reason not to hand it all over. Then he put a 2-paragraph affidavit on the table with a pen on top of it. My mother stood up and said she had to get back before the roads got worse, and I said, go on then. And she went. Vernon listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which he had never once done before. Then he took his glasses off and set them on the blotter. All right, he said. We win this in 20 minutes. He walked me through it like a roadmap. We put Patrice on the stand. We hand her the statements from the drawer, which Landry now has to produce because they are estate records. We ask her 3 questions. Did you take $61,400 from your mother? Did your brother show you those statements before you signed the affidavit? Did he mention what would happen to them if you did not? The affidavit dies. Vernon said, their case dies with it, and Landry will withdraw before the lunch recess, because his client will be sitting there watching his own witness explain a felony. I asked the question I already knew the answer to. What happens to my mother? Vernon put his glasses back on. It goes in a transcript, he said. Transcripts are public. A prosecutor in this county reads the local docket every Monday morning, and $61,000 is not a number they let go. He let that sit. Then he said, I am going to be honest with you. Because you are paying me to be. That is the cleanest path I have ever seen in an undue influence case. If you were my daughter, I would tell you to take it. Then he said the sentence that made me sit in my truck in the hardware store lot for 50 minutes with the keys in my lap. It is your case, Meredith. It is not mine. When I finally turned the engine over, I did not go up the ridge. I drove 3 blocks and I parked outside the Rowan Valley Bank on Water Street, 10 minutes before it closed. The mediation was set for the 8th of July. 10 in the morning, in the second-floor conference room at the Harlow County Courthouse. 6 days before it, Landry sent the number he had been holding back. $400,000. The nursing board complaint withdrawn in writing within 48 hours. The Adult Protective Services file closed with a family statement clearing me by name. The whole record sealed so that nobody in this county could ever pull it up. All I had to do was sign one paragraph. The paragraph said that Alma J. Kessler lacked the capacity to make the transfer of March 12th. Not reasonably disputed anymore. Lacked, in writing, from her granddaughter, forever. Vernon said take it. He said it plainly, and he did not dress it up. $400,000 is a house and 8 years of income in Harlow County, and he said I would be back on a schedule before Christmas. And he was almost certainly right. I asked him what happens to what my grandmother did on March 12th if I sign that. He said legally, nothing. It becomes a settled fact, I said, and she becomes a confused old woman. Vernon did not answer. Which was an answer. Back in June, 10 minutes before closing, I had sat down across the desk from Delia Pute and I had asked her one technical question, which was whether funds held in the court's escrow could ever be released for a payment into the estate before a hearing, and how fast. She had said she would find out. That week, she found out. I know some of you are watching this because somebody in your family has started doing math out loud about your parents. If that is, you write down the dates. Not for a lawsuit, for yourself. So that 4 years from now, you know what you actually did. Stay with me and hit subscribe. Because I need to tell you about the morning of the 8th. And what I did at 7:12 in the morning inside an empty bank lobby. That my own lawyer told me not to do. I got up at 4 in the morning. I did not drive to the courthouse first. The answer to my question in June had been a court order. Funds in escrow move when a judge says they move. And not before. So I told Vernon what I wanted, and Vernon Ashbrook, who is 64 years old and semi-retired and has never once raised his voice at me, said no. He said it 3 times in 11 minutes. He said that if I paid $61,400 of my own money into that estate before the hearing, I would be handing Landry a story on a plate. The caregiver quietly making a shortfall disappear 5 days before trial. He said I was throwing away the only leverage I had, and that leverage is not a dirty word. It is the entire reason people settle. I told him to file it anyway. He said he would need it in writing. I said I would drive down and write it. The motion asked the court to release $61,400 from escrow for payment into the estate of Alma J. Kessler as reimbursement of power of attorney withdrawals made in 2022 and 2023. Landry cannot oppose it without standing up in front of a judge and objecting to money going into his own client's estate. He did not oppose it. The order was signed on the 7th at 4 in the afternoon. On the morning of the 8th of July, Delia P. unlocked the side door of the Rowan Valley Bank at 7 o'clock for one customer. The lobby lights were still half off. The coffee was not made. She read the order. She processed the transfer. It cleared at 7:12. She printed the receipt. Stamped it. Initialed the stamp. And slid it across the counter. And she did not ask me a single question. Which I will be grateful for as long as I live. I picked it up, I folded it in half. Then I turned it and folded it again. 4 pieces. Then I put it in my shirt pocket and I drove up to the courthouse. And I got there at 10 minutes to 9. The conference room on the 2nd floor has a laminate table, 7 chairs that do not match, and a window air conditioner that shakes the blinds. The mediator was a retired judge named Halverson who kept a legal pad squared to the table edge. Landry sat with his back to the window in a suit that cost more than my truck. Ray sat across from me in his good jacket. Colleen sat beside him with her purse in her lap and her chin up, and 3 chairs down. Close enough that I could hear her breathe. My mother sat with her coat on in July. Landry did the reading. $400,000. Complaint withdrawn in 48 hours. File closed. Record sealed. No admission of wrongdoing by any party. And then the paragraph. He read the paragraph in the same voice he read the rest of it. And the paragraph said Alma J. Kessler lacked the capacity to make the transfer of March 12th. He turned the page around and set it in front of me. And he put his own pen on top of it. Which is a thing they teach you to do. I looked at it for a while. Then I put 2 fingers on the corner and I slid it back across the laminate. All the way. Until it touched his hands. I said no. Halverson asked me if I wanted to propose a counter. I said I did not. And then I looked at my uncle. And I kept my voice exactly where it lives. Because 6 years of telling families their mother has stopped eating will teach you what your voice is for. It is already gone, Ray, I said. It went where she sent it. Ray smiled at the table. He has a way of smiling at the table that is worse than shouting. That is fine, he said. That is fine. He will do it the long way then. He straightened his shoulders. He looked over at Landry, and he said we ought to talk about the family's other concerns while everybody was here. Then he turned in his chair, and he looked at my mother. He started slowly, the way you do when you want everyone to understand you are being reasonable. He said that in the course of administering the estate certain irregularities had come to light regarding the power of attorney, and that he had been reluctant to raise them, and that he supposed Mr. Landry would need to review the account records in full. My mother did not move. Her hands were folded on the table, her thumbs were white. Landry started writing. I took the receipt out of my shirt pocket. I unfolded it once. I unfolded it again. I laid it flat in the middle of the table. And I pushed it toward Halverson. He picked it up. He read it. His eyebrows went up about 1/4 of an inch. For the record, I said, $61,400 was paid into the estate of Alma Kessler at 7:12 this morning under the court's order of July 7th. There is no shortfall. There is nothing missing. Landry stopped writing. Ray's mouth opened, and then closed, and then I said the second thing, which is the only thing I did that week that I am actually proud of, and I said it slowly, so that Halverson could get it down. I wanted in the record that I will not be calling Patrice Milber as a witness, not at the hearing, not in any deposition, not under any circumstance, and not under any circumstance, and not if it costs me the case. Vernon closed his eyes. Halverson wrote it down and read it back to me, and I said yes. That is what I said. Ray came out of his chair about 4 inches. His voice went out for the first time in my life, and it cracked. And he said something about what my grandmother would have wanted, and he pointed at me with 2 fingers, and the air conditioner rattled the blinds under him. I did not stand up. I did not raise my voice. I waited until he ran out. The same way my mother had waited for me at her door in April. Then, keep the name Ray, I said. It is the only thing left in that drawer. Halverson set his pen down. Then he turned to my mother, and he asked her a question directly. Mrs. Milber, he said, you have given a sworn statement about your mother's condition on March 12th. Is there anything you want to say about it now? There was nothing holding her anymore. There was no drawer, no shortfall, no transcript with a number in it, and everyone in that room knew it, including Ray. My mother looked at her hands for a long time. The air conditioner cycled off. The room got very quiet. I could hear a floor buffer running somewhere down the hall. When she spoke, she did not look at me. She knew, my mother said. She always knew. She was sharper than I have ever been in my life. Landry set his pen down flat. Halverson wrote it and asked her if she wished to withdraw the affidavit, and she said yes, and that was the end of their case. At 9:11 in the morning, in a room with a bad air conditioner, then my mother picked up her purse. She stood. She smoothed the back of her coat, and she walked around the end of the table, and she went out. With Ray, and with Colleen. All 3 of them. Colleen took her arm in the doorway. I got up and I held the door, because that is a thing my hands do without asking me, and my mother went through it. 8 inches from me, and she did not turn her head. I stood in that hallway a long time after the elevator closed. Tile floors in county buildings hold sound in a particular way. You can hear a car door in the lot through 2 sets of windows. I had just spent $61,400, the only weapon I had, to cut a woman loose from a man who was holding her by the throat. And she got loose. And she walked out with him. I want to tell you I understood everything right then. I did not. I stood in a hallway with my keys in my hand, and I could not have told you what I was waiting for. Ray would not withdraw. Landry took it to a hearing on the 16th of July, because his client instructed him to, and you could tell from the way he set out his files that he had already lost interest. Delia Pugh testified for 35 minutes about a Tuesday afternoon in March. She described the branch procedure for a large cashier's check. 2 employees verify. The customer is taken to a private office out of earshot of any companion. The customer states the amount aloud. The customer writes the payee's name in their own hand, and a set of questions is asked and the answers noted. She said Alma Kessler wrote Meredith Milber in block capitals, without being prompted, and asked whether the middle initial was required. She said she had asked Mrs. Kessler per procedure whether anyone had asked her to do this, and she said my grandmother laughed at her and said, "Young lady, nobody has asked me to do anything since 1961. Then Dr. Greer testified that he had seen her in February and found her oriented and sharp, and that in 22 years he had never once had to repeat himself. The judge ruled from the bench after lunch. He dismissed the contest. The escrow order was dissolved, and by Friday $5 million was sitting in an account with my name on it, and nothing on top of it. That was the 16th. On the 21st, the Board of Nursing closed its file. Not a dismissal. They found no exploitation, and they issued a formal reprimand for a documentation violation. August 2020-30. Signing for a patient's prescription in the patient's name. It is public. Anybody with a computer can find it in about 90 seconds. And every director of nursing in 3 counties knows how to look. Denise Cobb called me the same week to tell me she had already filled my line. And she cried. And I ended up comforting her, which is the funniest thing that happened all year. So I won. I sat on a milk crate outside a 1994 travel trailer with $5 million and no job. And I finally understood what I had actually been fighting for since April. And it was not the money. It was for somebody in that family to say out loud that I had been there. Nobody ever did. Nobody was ever going to. The farm sold in October. 180 acres. The house went for $631,000 to a man from 2 counties over who runs cattle. After the fees and the taxes, Ray and my mother took about $291,000 apiece. Ray paid off the second mortgage and bought a new truck. I saw it outside the feed store in November. It is a nice truck. Nothing happened to him. That is the part people want me to lie about. He filed a case, he lost it, and he went home. Losing a case like that costs the man his lawyer's bill, and nothing else. Colleen tells her version at church, and it is a good version, and half this county believes it, and always will. I have stopped explaining. On the day the moving truck came down off the ridge, I was standing on my rock shelf with a coffee cup, and I watched the last load go past the end of my 2-track. Somebody had finally unplugged the timer. So that night, there was no light across the swale for the first time in 6 years. Just the shape of a roofline against the sky. I said it out loud to nobody, the way you do when you live alone. It is already gone. It went where she sent it. Then I went, and I heated up soup on a 2-burner stove, and I slept better than I had since March. It is April again. I am 34 years old. The trailer went to a man in Ledbetter who gave me $200 and a handshake. And there is a small house on my acre now. 1 story, 3 rooms, with a porch that faces east across the swale, because I could not make myself point it any other way. I know now why she gave me the worst acre on the ridge. It was the only piece nobody would ever bother to sue me for. She cut it off in 2021. She put it in my name, and she never said a word about it. And she was 90% sure her children were going to take everything else. And she was right. Ridgeline cut the Cutter Ridge route in 2024 because 22 miles up a gravel switchback for one patient does not pay. There are 4 old people still living on this road, so I pay for it. $31,000 a year to the agency. It covers the mileage and the hour. And Denise runs it on Thursdays. It is not charity. It is an invoice. And I like that about it. I do not go. That is the whole thing right there. And it took me a year to be able to do it. Yesterday at 4 o'clock, the agency car came up past my mailbox with a nurse in it who is 26 years old and drives too fast. And I sat on my step with a cup of coffee. And I watched it go up the hill without me. And I stayed where I was. In March, there was a lemon cake in my mailbox in a bakery box. There was no note in it. I ate a slice on the step with my fingers. People ask me if it was worth $5 million. They are asking the wrong question, because the check was never the thing my family was trying to tear up at that table. The thing they were trying to tear up was 6 years. And 6 years is not printed on anything. So it turned out to be the one item in that house that none of them could get their hands on. Nobody was ever going to pay me for it. She did. I want to say this to the woman watching this at 11 o'clock at night with a baby monitor on the counter and a medication list on the fridge and a family group text she has stopped opening. I see you. I know what your hands look like at the end of the day. I know what it costs to be the one who stays. Nobody is going to hand you a check on a Tuesday and tell you what you are worth. They are going to sit you in the corner chair with your back to the stove. They are going to send you a lawyer's letter with the word paid in front of your name. They are going to take the medication schedule off the fridge and put it in an exhibit binder and tell a judge it is proof of what you did wrong. And when the door closes on you, they are going to lock it from the inside. You are going to sit on a step somewhere in the dark, and you are going to think, well, this is familiar. Do not sign the paragraph. Do not sign the one that says she did not know. Do not sign the one that says she did not know. Do not sign the one that says you are not there. Do not let them tear up your 6 years, because your 6 years are the only thing in that house that they cannot get their hands on. And somebody, somewhere, saw you. Even if nobody in that room ever says it out loud. That is the whole story. 4 pieces of paper, 90 days, and one Thursday when I finally let somebody else drive up that hill. If this reminded you of somebody, if this reminded you of yourself, if this reminded you to find out who holds your mother's power of attorney, do not wait for a funeral to find out. Go ask this week. If you made it all the way to the end of this with me, I need you to do 3 things right now. Drop a comment below and tell me the name of the person in your family who kept the calendar. Just their first name. So they get seen tonight even if it is only by strangers. Hit that like button, because it tells the algorithm to show this to the next quiet woman sitting on a step in the dark. And she needs to hear it as much as you did. And subscribe, because there are more stories like this one. Women who kept the medication list and kept their mouths shut, right up until the day they stopped. And I am going to tell every single one of them. If somebody you love needs to hear this, send it to them tonight. Do not wait. I will see you in the next one.